You are listening to the Enormocast.
Greetings. This is a message from Dr. Alan Honlove of the Good Catch Institute. The weather is getting colder, and you're still desperately one-hanging your fall project. Or maybe you've decided to do something easier but more miserable, like ice climbing. Isn't it time to renew your commitment to your belayer with something more than an occasional high five? Good Catch is here to help you reinvigorate the foundation of what brought you and your belayer together in the first place. Our expert staff here at Good Catch suggests that you create a safe, warm space for your belayer with the belay parka and stance belay pants combo from our friends at Black Diamond Equipment. The BD belay parka features 2 layers of insulation, a 2-way zipper for wrapping that belay device, and huge internal pockets where your belayer can keep your shoes warm for your next go. The stance belay pants bring the heat with side zips to get in and out even with crampons on. Being wrapped in the BD belay parka and stance belay pants create the feeling of a warm hug from a trusted loved one without the actual human touch that might, give your belayer the wrong idea. But nothing says,
dude, I'm just going to try this part one more time,
like some bomber insulated outerwear from Black Diamond Equipment. Check it all out at blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop. And remember, if you are cold, they're freezing their ass off.
Hey, what's up? It's your toes talking here. That's a nice alpine climb you got there. I'd hate to see something happen to it. Like when we get cold. Life gets pretty miserable, eh, hotshot? Instead of a ballerina up there, you feel like a walrus. Not a svelte walrus who swims all day, but one of them big ones who let seagulls crap on them. And if we ever do warm up again, well, get ready to howl like a banshee. And not a cool banshee that scares everybody, but one of them banshees the other banshees make fun of for sounding stupid. So get with it, buddy, and get some sick mountain boots from Sportiva. That's right, Italian made. So high-tech they're like, what? Oh, we gotta go? Alright, just listen to your toes and check out all of Sportiva's ice climbing and big mountain boots at Sportiva.com or your local shop. And tell them your toes sent you.
Listen, where are you playing in town? Are you playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah,
a
big
house. We
place
sold it
outside
out.
of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
2006?
You really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Good weather, bad weather. Now or later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
and the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Kalous. It is November 28th, 2021, about 9:30 here in Colorado, and this is episode 231 of the Enormocast, a conversation with Indian climber Gowri Varanashi. And let me tell you, when she says her name, it sounds way better than that. I dare say this woman has a sumptuous accent. Am I allowed to use the word sumptuous when describing the way a woman talks? Is that okay? Sumptuous is okay, isn't it? One of its definitions, at least, is exceedingly magnificent. Anyway, she's coming all the way from India. We connected via the internet, and it worked out really well, actually. We had a great conversation and had very little tech problems that I often complain about here. And the internet is a pretty awesome thing when it works. It was like we were sitting in the same room together, even though she was, I believe, in Bangalore, which is a long ways away from Carbondale, Colorado. Learned a lot about Indian climbing, about her social movements there and what she's trying to do in the nascent climbing community in India to get it equal from the start. More on that in a minute. Before we get there, I would like to remind you that in addition to our large marquee sponsors, Sportiva, Black Diamond, who, for as big as they are, let me get away with murder on those commercials. Murder. I mean, the voices. You think Red Bull would let me do that? I don't think so. But anyway, the Enormocast has 3 long-term little guy sponsors. Of course, Bonfire Coffee, which you hear about in the beginning of the show every single time, is Charlie Chacos here in Carbondale, restaurateur. Anyway, he owns a couple of restaurants here as well as a small roaster. If you've ever spent the night in Carbondale, I hope that someone directed you to the Smithy for breakfast. Definitely a local landmark. Also, of course, Peter W. Gilroy down there in New Mexico, artist, jewelry maker, also the maker and inventor of the splitter hat, the hats with the titanium on it, with a bunch of climbing and mountain-inspired plaques on them. Go check out his stuff, peterwgilroy.com. Enter Enormo at checkout. And then Phil up there in Salt Lake City, Belay Specs, also pretty much a one-man show up there, or a one-family show anyway. Go to belayspecs.com and enter Enormocast to get a discount up there. But check this out, all of that, small businesses. So when you're thinking about holiday gift giving, which, you know, you're actually kind of running out of time for that. I think Hanukkah already started, actually. So anyway, but if you're like me and you're doing all your stuff last minute or in the next couple of weeks, you're going to wait even longer. Think about supporting small businesses. Those 3 are a great idea. You also support the Enormocast. Consider it. Or maybe it's January by the time you hear this. Get something for yourself. You deserve it. It's a long winter. Okay, let's talk about the conversation with Gowri. Alexis Krauss, who was on the show last year, lives up in the Gunks, climbed with Gowri, worked a little bit with her on these women's climbing initiatives. Well, anyway, Alexis introduced us on the internet, and that's how we got this thing done. So shout out to Alexis and one of the initiatives she works with, a bump for young women who crush, which gets younger women students out of New York, takes them climbing, introduces them to the outdoors. Really cool stuff. So bump for that. Anyway, back to Gowri. Gowri is an Indian climber. She learned to climb in the States, but fell in love with it in India and immediately realized that there were not very many women climbers at all in India, even way less than she was used to here in the States. So she's created Climb Like a Woman, CLAW for short, to try to get Indian women out climbing. And there's a lot of barriers against that, different barriers even than the U.S. There's, I think, a lot more taboo about women participating in outdoor activities in general in India, at least the way Gowri describes it. So quite courageous of her to be trying to break a lot of those stereotypes and go against very deep-rooted traditions in Indian life. Gowri is also an excellent climber herself, a naturalist, and has a really great philosophy about why and how she approaches climbing that we all can learn from. So dig it. The sumptuous voice of Gowri. Reading your bio, you first initially climbed when you were in the U.S. It sounds like going to a climbing gym, and then, like a lot of climbers, you learned a bit there and then graduated to climbing outside and fell in love with it, and then kind of returned to India as a climber. So can you describe a little bit about like what the climbing scene in India kind of looks like, the numbers, the type of people who do it, and the climbing that is available to you where, you know, at least where you live and maybe even across the country? Because I don't know anything about it other than Hampi.
Yeah, Hampi, yeah.
Because of, you know, this very dated video of Chris Sharma in a teeny tiny Katie Brown climbing there,
Yeah.
And that's still the only thing I kind of know about the rock climbing. I know a bit about the alpinism, but yeah. So can you kind of describe what you came back to after learning to climb in the States and found in your native country?
Growing up, I had no idea that there was rock climbing going on in India. And I got introduced to rock climbing in the US. And then funnily, I was actually told by one of my American friends that there is a Facebook climbers group for Bangalore. And I was stunned. I was like, really? How did I not know about this? And so this was in 2014. I reached out to the person who was sort of spearheading this new, outdoor movement in India at that time, specifically actually in Bangalore. So I reached out to him and I said, hey, I'm going to be coming and visiting home for a few months in between, going to college in the US. Can I come join you? Will you take me out climbing? He said, yeah, of course. Why not? And first thing I noticed was so few people were actively going climbing outdoors. So there was a WhatsApp group which had about, I don't know, maybe barely about 100 people in that group. And out of those 100, it was a lot of like chatter in the group about climbing and technical stuff. And out of those people, only maybe like 10, 15 actually went out and climbed outdoors. And of course, out of those 10, 15 who actively went out and climbed, when I would come here to climb, I would often find myself being the only woman climbing outdoors, right? So it's a very small community. And at that time in 2014, it was really small. Like across India, there was maybe a handful of climbers in Delhi, a handful in Bombay, few in Bangalore. And ever since then, one thing I've noticed is climbing is slowly picking up now. And so now there's definitely more intro workshops taking place in Delhi and in Bangalore. And just because of that, more people are, getting familiar with the sport. And of course, social media helps a lot, right? People see it and people think, oh, I want to go climb and get photos of me climbing. That's also a little bit of a part of it. But because of that, there's been a lot of interest, and the climbing community has definitely doubled in numbers. Like now we have WhatsApp groups that have like 200 plus people in it in each city. So yeah, the climbing community is slowly growing, but there is still a long way to go in India. It's it's still a small group compared to the US, where it's so developed now and well established. It's still a growing community here. And in terms of even developing crags and opening, bouldering areas, there is a lot to be done, and it's happening at a very slow pace. And in terms of climbing areas, there's also, of course, access issues. So it's kind of, in these initial stages where people are still sort of trying to figure out everything about climbing, but they also want to go explore and establish new places. But it's tricky because it's not always so easy to either have that skill set in order to go and, develop new crags quickly enough, or we don't have enough funding or access to gear. So it is still very much a process. And in terms of access, just to give you a little quick intro to all the different climbing areas. Hampi is, of course, the most well-known, bouldering mecca of India, right? But there's also about 2 hours away from Hampi, there is a place called Badami. And Badami is basically the most well-known sport climbing crag of India as of now. That is a red sandstone crag, which is all single pitch sport climbs. And the hardest one, I think there were a few people who came and climbed, the hardest climb there in Badami as well, which is called Ganesha. It's an 8B plus climb. And apart from Hampi and Badami, there has been a lot of development recently up in the north. So it's the foothills of the Himalayas. So it's pine forest, and the areas are just stunning. And there's one place called Setan where it's been sort of well developed. It literally feels like you've gone abroad and you're not climbing in India. The rock quality is excellent. and it's nestled in this pine forest up in the mountain, and it's just beautiful. But there's a lot more development and exploration happening now in the mountains. For example, Ladakh has a bunch of climbing areas now and even a few sport crags. Setan is near Manali, so Manali has a lot as well. There is some in Uttarakhand. So just kind of spread out, all over the foothills of the Himalayas. There are these new places popping up.
Are you considering moving?
Actually, this past year, this year, so I just came back from the mountains. I was there for about 2.5 months. I just absolutely fell in love with not just the climbing there, but also just the nature. It's funny because I was kind of sad when I left the US, but I was also excited to come back to India. And one of the things that I felt really sad about was, I just thought, oh, I'm never going to see all these plants. I love foraging. I'm into wild edibles and wild mushrooms. And I thought, I'm never going to see these plants again. I'm so sad. But then it was amazing because I got to the mountains and I realized I know all the plants. I've met them before in the US because it's such similar, plant diversity. It was all the same. And it was just, it was really, really exciting for me to go realize that for me, it's not just climbing there that's kind of, drawing me there, but it's also the plants.
So the development that's going on now, I know that in the past, the intrepid French and a lot of times the UK climbers, especially in a place like India, former colony with all those unfortunate parts of that, but nevertheless, a connection to the UK. And so a lot of times those guys are the first people to come and develop a lot of those crags. Is the development going on now, is much of it still a lot of visiting climbers, or are there Indian climbers spearheading any of that development?
Yeah, so it's interesting because now I think it's finally sort of, flipped, where it is a lot of Indian climbers who are going out there and exploring and establishing new bouldering areas and even sport climbing. Just this year, there was a new initiative that started to set up an entire sport climbing crag in Setan, where it was already established as a bouldering area. But as people went to boulder there, they started seeing all these massive, walls, and they said, hey, why aren't we doing something here? So it was actually a beautiful effort. Bunch of us from the climbing community came together, sort of spearheaded by this one guy. But it was so beautiful because everyone started donating whatever bolts they had, money to buy bolts, and just we all put this together, and they just started bolting routes there as well recently. And it was just so beautiful to watch that happening, because I feel like the community is now, it's still small technically, but I think we've grown to a reasonable size where the community can now start saying, hey, why don't we put all our resources and time together and actually invest our time and energy into going to these places and establishing new areas, new routes, and that kind of transformation in what the community wants to do in India just shows that we are sort of growing and maturing as a climbing community, right? Very slowly, but it is happening.
I don't think it's really something we, and I say we as in my generation of climbers, being, several generations past when I started, didn't really think about the fact that climbing has an economic barrier to it. I mean, it's hard to think about that when you're 18 years old or whatever, and putting gear together. We were a group of guys that we pooled our gear, and one guy had a rope and one guy had two friends, and it didn't seem like that big of a burden to us. But of course, we came from an economic place that hadn't trained us to that. But we've been seeing that in the States and talking about it with different communities, how there is this burden. What about in India? And you were just talking about the community pooling resources. But what do you see as the barriers there? And is the community thinking about that in terms of how to include all walks of life in the sport?
I mean, economic barrier is for sure, a big reason why I think the sport is growing slowly in India. And also I think, even the fact that, it's sort of picking up these last few years kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that, recently I think people have been finally making a little bit more of an income. So they have that, it's the same thing in the US, right? It's having that luxury to say that, okay, I'm going to go explore something that also requires a lot of money. And you're only able to do that when you're comfortable in life, you're earning a certain amount, or, you have that sort of safety net. And that's when you feel like, okay, I can actually go explore something like this, right? So same thing in India. I think the fact that people have been in the past few years becoming just more comfortable in their lifestyles and earning a little bit more has definitely influenced people in wanting to come out and explore these kind of alternative like sports. But even today, I think it's definitely still a barrier because, I have these discussions all the time with people here is we can't get shoes easily. We can't get gear easily, right? Everything has to come from the US. And when that's happening, you're doing the exchange rate between the US dollar and rupee, and it's horrible. You're just paying so much more to get that same product. So I think that's definitely part of it, is that economic sort of, struggle. But I think the economic barrier is definitely becoming slightly less now, where people are trying to figure out ways. And like you said, there's a lot of pooling happening as well, because we're still in that initial stage. So a lot of people are friendly and inviting, and, they say, hey, as long as you have a harness and shoes, you can come join us, even if you don't have gear initially, So there's a lot of that kind of sharing and inviting and pooling happening.
So you haven't reached this stage like here where everybody just gives each other dirty looks because the crag's so crowded.
Not yet, no.
Yeah, you guys are a couple decades away from that, but get ready.
Exactly. No, it's funny because I lived near the gungs for so long, and I used to hear all these conversations with Alexis and some of the old time climbers. And it was so funny for me to hear that, that they would tell me, oh, it was so different back in my day. And I was like, really? And now I'm like, oh, wait, okay. I'm kind of seeing this happening right now. But yeah, I think some of the other barriers are definitely access issues do exist. But I think that becomes evident once you're already part of the climbing community and you have become a climber. Because that's when you really go and end up facing those access issues, But I guess one other barrier I would say for people into getting into the sport itself would definitely be like a cultural sort of expectation or societal, what are people going to think? I'm sure we'll get into this more with women, but even with men, there is this sort of, hesitation or judgment that, oh, you're just going and, having fun and not actually doing anything productive. Like, what are you doing with your life? Because there are certain expectations even on men here in India, just because of the way the traditions and customs have been, and the way the society has been like slightly more conservative until recently. So there is still a little bit of that happening as well. So I think it does take a little bit for people to say, hey, I want to go do this, and it's okay if my family is not happy with me doing this. I'm still going to go continue to climb. There's definitely that in India for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's always been like this masculinity thing that's associated with climbing. Like you're this manly man that goes out and conquers mountains. That was kind of the old tradition, and but the thing I've thought about that is that turns it on its head a little bit with masculinity is that the fact is that we joke about how much we really actually fail when we go out and we climb, and when you first initially start it, you definitely look like kind of an idiot, and you flail and you fall and you don't succeed. And so I think about like a culture that has like these set ideas of masculinity, all cultures do, and how like going out into a world and being like a miserable failure for a while is probably like a daunting thing in terms of, if someone has a real set idea of masculinity.
Yeah. And also, I think in India, it's one is that, and it is that masculinity issue, but the other is also, interestingly enough, there is this, like idea of you need to like work hard in life and live a certain way. And as soon as, families see everyone going out and climbing for hours and not working hard, they think, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. You're not doing anything productive. And on top of that, interestingly, actually, this is something that you might find interesting. For some reason, competition climbing has been around for a long time, right? And there are quite a few strong climbers in India that no one knows about because they only do, or until recently, they would only do competition climbing. And they have coaches who would not allow them to go outdoors. And so a lot of them would never go out and explore, rock outdoors. And the reason behind this was, and again, this is kind of goes in with this whole cultural expectation or societal norms. Families, and this doesn't just have to do with climbing, it's any sport. They only give it importance if their kids are winning awards and winning cash prizes. That's it. And they're like, we don't care what else happens or what else the sport is good for their children. As long as their kid is going and, winning cash prizes, and then they can go tell people, oh yeah, my kid's an athlete. He or she goes and wins cash prizes when, they do this climbing thing. And so that's what it was for so many years. And I realized when I started coming here in 2014, I kept questioning, why aren't there more people climbing outdoors? And I realized one of the reasons was this. Very few strong climbers were coming out and climbing outdoors back then in 2014 because they thought that comp climbing is the way to go. That is what they should be doing because then their families don't complain. It's easier, right? Because their families are like, oh, I'm so impressed. You won cash. That's great. And they had this feeling that if they go outdoors, their training will get disturbed and it won't be efficient enough. And over the last few years, thankfully that has changed, and a lot of these strong climbers have been coming out and just, crushing it on rocks. And it's been really fun to see that transition as well compared to 2014.
Hearing all these things that we're talking about, it's like there's threads of that in U.S. culture 100% also, and it's like maybe because, again, the sport is so new, we're kind of seeing hyper examples of it there. But I mean, all those things have run through our climbing as well. Like myself, who came from the Midwest, it's like I didn't get it too hard from my parents, but it was definitely like why are you just like living in your car, like when you could be, going out and doing something. So that's all been there. Talking about cultural norms definitely applies to women. Said that you arrived in India and was one of the only women you met who was climbing outdoors. Also, I think it might have been interesting because you probably arrived thinking you were a rope beginner because of comparing yourself to the U.S., but you probably arrived with some skills that were pretty envious to the whole climbing community, like just maybe arrived kind of on top of the heap as far as what you knew skill-wise anyway, which actually probably set you up to be an excellent female role model. Like, oh, she actually just waltzed in and was like one of the top people in this group. So talk a little bit about, your ideas to try to do these women climbing groups and to attract these folks to the sport, and again, what some of the barriers you perceived that you needed to overcome to get women to show up to the cliff.
So for me, I think it all kind of started since 2014 when I would come here and then go back to the US, and I would start making these comparisons. And I think initially it was 2015 when I started realizing, I always kind of was aware that it was just me and a couple of other women climbers here who was kind of active whenever I came to India, but not really. But what really made me start thinking about doing these women's events was in the US, I began noticing, a lot of movements and efforts going towards organizing women's festivals. Like I came across Flash Foxy, and I actually attended one of their events in 2016. And I also noticed the gyms doing ladies' nights and these different clubs that were there set up for, taking women out climbing. So I began noticing all these things. And then I would come to India and nothing was happening. Like nothing was happening in the climbing world, right? And that got me thinking, okay, why is this the case? First of all, there's very few women in general climbing in India. Second of all, no one's doing anything to try and get women out, to increase those numbers. So I just started kind of thinking about it a lot. And in the way the idea sort of, came about is in 2017, and these are all super interconnected, right? Because for me too, like I had only started climbing in 2013, and for a year I didn't really take it seriously. So it all kind of came together in 2017 when I applied for the Live Your Dream grant in the US given by the American Alpine Club in the North Face. And I picked a route in Badami in India. And I explained in my grant that the reason why, because they ask you, why are you picking a specific route? Why is it in that country? And I explained that, by me going and projecting and pushing myself, I hope that I can inspire other women in India, women climbers who are mostly focusing on competitions and maybe just doing other climbing, to actually also start pushing themselves. But what I also mentioned in the grant was that I've been noticing this discrepancy where there's, nothing being done in India, and I would like to do a women's event and see what the response is like and see if women are interested to come try something like this with guidance. And I also realized, that climbing is a difficult sport to get into if you have no idea how to go about it, right? Because one, it's expensive. You need to know how to use gear. Even with bouldering, you need to have crash pads. You need to know how to place it. You need to know how to spot. I mean, there's a lot that goes into getting into the sport. And in India, the gym scene was also very weak back then. There was only like one outdoor wall in Bangalore and one small gym. So it wasn't even like in the US where I would notice a lot of people would come and climb in gyms, make friends, connect with each other, and then they would end up going outdoors with someone. But here, even that was impossible, right? So I realized someone needs to actively do something to introduce, to mentor, to guide. And this way, then women would feel encouraged to actually come and try the sport. So that's how it all sort of came about. And in the end, in 2018 was when I reached out to a couple of other women climbers who I'd finally met in India and become friends with. And I asked them, hey, like, do you want to join me in doing this? And they said, yes. So that's how Claw started. And the interesting thing was, when I initially did the first event in 2018, I kind of went with no expectations or with no sort of future plans or anything. I just wanted to do one and see what happens. And the response was just, I don't know, it was just mind blowing. And it gives me goosebumps even now when I think about the feedback we got from women and the kind of things that women said. And that was when I realized this is not about climbing. It's actually about empowering women. It's about, getting together and breaking barriers together and proving everyone that, in India, women can do what they want. They don't have to follow the societal norms or what their families say or the pressure that's put on them. And they don't have to just do what women are expected to do, but they can in fact go and try sports outdoors and do whatever they want, basically, with their bodies, their life, their time. And so it instantly clicked to me that this is something that is way bigger than just climb like a woman, and it needs to continue because of that. It's because it has a much larger meanings.
How did you at all even advertise or find get it to women? Because I think it's like you said, like even getting this idea into someone's ear about climbing is tricky, without like a climbing gym to post on and what I'm saying. So did you use Facebook, or how did you get it into these ears of these women that joined you?
It was actually Instagram.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah. So I don't even know how, but I think at that point I had like a decent Instagram following, and there was another Indian climbers girl who also had she's part of the claw team. She also had some, and it was sort of this, we thought, you know what, let's just create a page. I mean, I created an Instagram page when I decided I'm going to do it, like just randomly created it, started posting some pictures of women climbing and then created a website, and we just started promoting it. And, I don't know, I guess there were enough women following a few of us. The response was so quick. We had instantly people following the page and starting to ask us questions like, hey, do I need previous experience? Do I need to be fit? Do I need to have, what do I need to be a certain age? And all these questions started pouring in, and right away it was clear that this is definitely something that is needed in India, and it was pretty amazing to see that. And then, of course, after that, it's been, I think, a mix of word of mouth and social media. Like, I think women who've come to our events have loved it so much that they then go tell, more of their friends, and they push their friends to come. And so we end up getting people from both social media and word of mouth. But initially, it was actually just social media, and we were not even thinking that we would get that many signups, but we got 30 women. And out of the 30 women, 25 had never climbed before. And yeah, I mean, some of the things I heard them say and the change in attitude and confidence by the end of the event was so magical to sort of witness and be a part of, that we were all just so thrilled, at the end of it, and so excited to continue. We had this new, like, energy in us, this flame in us, we're like, yeah, we need to do this for, like, women in India and, empower each other. And it was just really exciting. No, so I just wanted to share, some of the feedback that we've had from women at the end of claw events, right? Because I think that will really sort of paint the picture of why it's so powerful right now. I had so many women come up to me before the event and tell me, oh, I always assume that climbing and sports are for people with certain body types, or like someone like you who looks strong, right? Or skinny, or all these misconceptions, right? And I had people come and tell me, I don't think I'm fit enough. I'm like super nervous. I mean, this year at Claw, one of the women said she always felt super nervous to wear like sleeveless tops. Even something as simple as that in India is something that women struggle with on a daily basis, right? Because you think you're going to get judged. You think people are going to, do so, like, I don't know, catcall you, or like have inappropriate behavior take place. And so these struggles are so sort of in our faces every day that these women said it was so freeing for them to just come and wear whatever they wanted. And they realized that no one cared about getting tanned, because in India, it's this huge thing where fair-skinned people are looked upon with more respect and are considered superior. Because, like you said, the colonization, and there's this whole like white people worship kind of thing. So dark is bad. So families actually yell at girls and women if they go out and even just spend time out in the sun, because they're going to get dark, right? So here we were, and even getting scratches on the skin is a big no-no. There are all these crazy things that women have to abide by in society here. And so here we were all just dressed the way we wanted to. We were all getting dark, getting scratched by the rock and just going all out. And the women every year, the feedback is, it is just so freeing, and it makes them so happy to see other women also staying strong and just coming and doing what we feel like doing. And, there's this camaraderie and everyone feels this bonding, and it gets so intense and so beautiful that we all feel sad when we leave. I mean, this year we were all crying, like half of us were crying. I was crying. But like it truly ends up feeling like a community because it's a 5-day event. So we're all just together for 5 days.
So what's the future and current status of your plans with this, and also, do you have economic support? Do you have any brands or anybody else that might come into the team? Because I mean, if you're going to do 30 women clinics, you got to have gear, and you're not necessarily a guide service that's got piles of it laying around.
Yeah, that has been kind of tricky and like changing each year in India because it's really tough to get support in India. I mean, even from international brands, let alone in India, there's only a small handful of brands that sort of cater to, outdoor gear and outdoor equipment and even climbing equipment for that matter. But the first year it was somewhat okay. We've never got financial support or backing ever. Companies never seem to want to give us that. They're always like, no, take some of our products. You can have some of our products, but not money, which is okay. Like we've been managing, with whatever we've been getting in terms of gear. So the first 2 years, there was an Indian brand called Gipfel. They make tents and even crash pads. So they sort of supported us and they said, hey, this is awesome. This is such a new concept. Like, this is great that you guys are doing this. So we're going to give you enough tents to sleep 30 women and enough crash pads for your entire event. And so that really helped us out. And American Alpine Club, actually, the first year supported us and let us do an Instagram takeover and, sort of screen live moments onto their Instagram, which sort of helped us get more momentum. But yeah, it keeps changing. Like this year, it was a little bit of a challenge to figure out crash pads, but we did not need tents because it was up in the mountains. So we figured out like homestays for everyone and shoes. We've really been helped with shoes. The Cliffs has given us, so because when I used to live in the US, I would just reach out to the gyms and ask them, hey, if you have these, these shoes that lay around in gyms, and I know about those because I used to work in some of the gyms in New Jersey. So I reached out to all these big chains and I was like, can you please give us donate shoes that I can take back to India? It'll be of such big help for us. And they did. They donated, I think, in total, they've given us 23 pairs of shoes, which is just brilliant. But yeah, even then, sometimes we have to arrange more shoes because we don't always have the size and things like that. So for that, we've been getting support from certain local climbing organizations who happen to have more gear inventory. And they've all been so supportive. Anytime we've reached out and we've said, hey, can you give us these shoes? We don't have these sizes. They've always been like, yeah, of course. One of them is Bangalore Climbing Initiatives. They're also sort of the ones who initially started all the workshops and events to get more climbers in. But yeah, so we've had a lot of support, but it's always been in these little pockets, Mm-hmm. But it's been amazing. We've always felt grateful for that support, and we've been able to run 3 editions now with just all this sort of random support from here and there and gyms and all over the place. It is tricky in India.
Yeah. It sounds tricky, but the whole time you're talking, and this, I know a lot of folks in the industry listen to this show. So really the amount of support you need to run these things is not even a budget line item for some of these larger companies, including my sponsors, Black Diamond and whatnot. So hopefully listening to this, I mean, I just, the idea that 24 pairs of shoes is a giant boon is amazing, but it's also not a problem for some of these brands. So I think it's a matter of time, and hopefully even this will bring some interest in, because it seems like such this powerful thing, because we do it here in the States, as you said. Mm-hmm. There's been this massive push, I think, of the last decade to bring women into the sport, and it's literally worked. I mean, there's no denying that we are starting to reach parity in terms of women and men climbers. In especially in gym climbing and competition climbing and places like that. So it's working here in the States, and any brand that's realize that their market has doubled, that
Right.
it's just like a no-brainer to me to
Exactly.
to like hand over 24 pairs of climbing shoes from a
Yeah.
brand to hook a bunch of people in India. I mean, if you want to be that sort of cynical about it, it just seems like a no-brainer thing. Brands that are listening to this show right now, So I think it's brilliant and like to hear your voice like get excited and come up when you start talking about this is clear your passion for it.
I mean, and the thing is, like, even just since starting Claw, we've had so many more women become part of the community and increase in numbers. So even here, we're already seeing slightly more equal ratios in just 3 editions of Claw. And also part of it is, as we do Claw, we're also promoting on social media that women can do all this. And that's also helping. So more women are coming out on their own and just wanting to try, come to the gyms. They join us wherever we go outdoors. And so it's already, you can already see, that it's doing good. It's just that, yeah, I think for some reason with brands and to do with India, I don't know what it is. There's barely any climbers or athletes supported by brands in India. Mm-hmm. I think maybe it's to do with shipping and customs, and I completely get that it's all complicated, but it still surprises me that, it's really difficult in India and there are some strong climbers here, and there are some strong upcoming women climbers as well, but it's just a tricky thing. But yeah,
I feel like, I mean, myself included, I'm like, I would consider myself fairly knowledgeable about climbing even around the world. And I still didn't have this picture in my head of Indian climbing. And it's like you guys are as a community looking outward, this is the beginning. And so I think that you're just at the foothills, if, to use a terrible climbing analogy, but you're definitely looking forward to more exposure and, it'll kind of come into, I think, a rolling with all of a sudden brands understanding like, okay, we have this place which is new. And the cool thing about it is, you talk about how small the climbing community is, and we've in the States we had 50 years catch up to do in terms of and we're working. A lot of brands are working on diversity now as well, and we're trying to catch up with that. And it's like India has this opportunity with its climbing community. You have an opportunity with the climbing community to like start out in this world. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not too hard for you to bring in enough women climbers to equal it out from the very beginning. It's like if we were doing this in Yosemite in the 1950s or something here in the States. So I just think like there's this exciting opportunity to start from the ground up, again, like another dumb climbing pun, but I can't help it. You know what I mean?
Ground up boating, ground up. Yes. But I mean, Claw, that is the idea behind Claw, right? Is, I guess, because everything is so small now, there is this, ability for us to sort of try and keep the ratios even from the beginning, which hopefully, I mean, our hope is that we can, if we mentor and teach enough women and get enough women to get interested and really continue and get stronger, then eventually it would be amazing if, some of the Claw ladies and even us included, like the Claw team, if we all start sort of trying to even pitch in and work with others, even in route setting, right? Because it's so different, like with our body types and the way women move, it's a different style sometimes. And so it can bring more diversity in general, because then we would also be pitching into bolt sport routes or open boulder problems. And that is like kind of the goal, as well with Claw, which is we can do so much. Because as of now, like, for example, there's only about 4 of us women who have climbed an 8A climb. I mean, there are more who are stronger, who can easily come do it. But just to give you an example, it's very few women right now who are, at a certain level trying to learn more skills. So it would just be really amazing to have these women, feel so empowered that they want to come and learn bolting, for example, or exploring and figuring out new lines and new crags, and actually becoming a part of the community to also help develop and, sustain and maybe teach more women, right? And influence more women to come and join. So yeah, this is all part of it.
I just had this amazing thought if like in 20 years, there's some Indian climber who's like, we have this crisis of no men climbing in our climbing scene. We're doing men's nights. We're having men's climbing groups because like all we have here are women climbers.
That would actually
like some alternate
funny.
Universe where it's like the dudes are like, wow, we really need to attract guys to the sport.
That would be so hilarious.
There's no giant dinos in any of these routes.
Exactly. It's all really technical, crimpy, crouchy, I don't know, moves that really...
I feel very discriminated against when I go to the gym that I can't flex my muscles. Anyway.
Oh my God.
Anyway, maybe there's some fantasy world that'll happen. It'd be great. Yeah, men just totally intimidated all the time at the gym. It'd be amazing. So we've been going here for a long time about how much you sort of give to the community, and outwardly, but let's talk about you a little bit as well as a climber. I have some of your bio, it's actually, no offense, but it's like a really, it's a little bit typical of a modern climber where you went to the gym, you got in and out, like kind of hooked, kind of not, but then all of a sudden you had a moment or you had a season or you had a time where you were like, this is really something I want to do. Then you went outside, which is, I think, it's kind of the modern version of it. But tell me a little bit about you as a kid, or at least as a young person that you think, I try to like to form this basis for where you became the kind of woman who would be like, I'm going to try climbing, while so many of these other women, have such a hard time crossing that barrier. What attracted you to climbing, you think? What were the kind of the roots of it that you found yourself there? Not necessarily how it happened, but what was inside of you to find that world attractive, do you think?
I think for me, it's just loving the outdoors so much, and that came about at a very young age. I was very lucky to go to an alternative school in India, in the outskirts of Bangalore city, with a super wild campus where in India, a lot of it, especially South India, is made up of a lot of boulders, and it's a shrub forest land, strewn with a lot of boulders everywhere. So for me, my childhood was essentially climbing up trees and plucking mangoes and tamarinds and making tamarind chocolate by sneaking into our school kitchen and stealing some sugar. And we would have a favorite rock. We would have a rock that we named Secret Rock. And this was my version of climbing at a very young age. It had a tree leaning next to it. So we would go climb up a tree, pluck tamarind. Do you know what tamarind is? Mm-mm. The really tangy, it's a tangy fruit that has multiple seeds with pulp around it. And it's delicious because you can remove the pulp, and then usually it gets used in cooking, but we kids would steal sugar and we would climb up using the tree and also using the rock onto our secret rock and sit and, act like, little, like back in the day, like these nomads or something would take rocks and crush the pulp and crush sugar into it and make these wonderful little tangy candy basically that we would sit and eat. Yeah, and then we would scramble on rocks like every other day. Like we would just be scrambling on rocks and climbing trees. And one of the lucky things that we had near our school was Asia's second largest monolith, which was only 20 minutes away. It's this huge rock named called Savandurga. And so every month our teachers would take us walking. That used to be our little field trip out of the school. We would walk up this giant monolith, sleep the night on the rock with no sleeping bags. We would literally just lay down on the rock, go to sleep, wake up the next morning. And
you had a forced bivvy. You were like, you were like training for
exactly.
like being benighted
Exactly.
on some climb somewhere when
Being
you're a
super
little kid.
uncomfortable. Being super uncomfortable. But
You ever get stuck on a ledge somewhere, you're going to be like,
Nah,
this is no
fine.
big deal, you guys. I'm fine. I'll just sleep here on this rock. I'm good.
Exactly. And it's funny because half the time we would all, initially it would be uncomfortable, but we got so used to it. My memory was just not that it was uncomfortable. It changed at some point, and I just don't remember it being that uncomfortable, even though I'm sure it was initially. And my thing was to always walk bare feet up and down that rock. It was always bare feet for some reason, because in India we grow up in flip-flops, which we call chappals. And so we grow up in chappals, and so we would just get up to the base, and before beginning the walk up, we would all take off our flip-flops and hold it in our hands and walk up all the way to the top. Yeah, and I think just, growing up in that campus and that school gave me a lot of time to learn about nature and learn about what's in my surroundings. So one year I studied butterflies, another year I studied snakes. I love snakes. And, just growing up kind of like a wild child, I guess, sort of set this in motion. And I loved climbing trees growing up, right? So when I came to the US to study, the way I got into climbing was I started guiding in the Peruvian Amazon rainforest during my winter breaks through college. And one year, one of my friends, Dara, she came with us, and she saw me with, of course, no protection because we didn't have anything at that point. But I climbed up a strangler fig tree to like quite a height and then down climbed it. And she saw me and she just said, "You have to come with me to rock climb." I said, "Okay, take me." And that's sort of how it started. So I think when I went to the gym, initially, like, of course I was hooked. I loved it because it was, climbing, and it was that body movement that I'd always enjoyed. But what got me really hooked was when I first went outdoor climbing. Because I think that's when I realized that all these passions of mine and, even the memories of climbing trees as a kid, all of those kind of came to me, and I realized I just love it. I love climbing rocks and just being out in nature for hours. It's for me, it's a way to just keep connecting and reconnecting to nature. And so it was just like this perfect combination of all my passions, coming together and making it happen in one place in that one moment. So that is, yeah.
Where did you go to college?
I went to college at Bard College in the US.
Okay.
Yeah.
So upstate New York,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So near the Gunks.
Near
and
the
that's
Gunks.
probably how you ended up meeting Alexis Krauss eventually,
Yes.
who introduced us online as part of why you're here today.
Yes.
What did your first outdoor climbing experience look like?
So the first year when I kind of started climbing indoors, it was like on and off. I would go for a few weeks and then stop for a few months and then kind of go back. So I didn't get regular until like the second year when I really started climbing more. And then a few of my friends invited me to go outdoors. And so I think I did briefly go and do like top roping in the Gunks. But I think the moment that really truly stands out to me that I really remember is that same year I came back to visit home to India. And the person who I had initially contacted in 2014, his name is Sohan. He's kind of become like a continuing mentor to me, as is Alexis, actually. She's mentored me a lot too. I love her for that. But he took me to a sport crag on the outskirts of Bangalore, and they would, lead it and set it up. So at that point, I already did no lead belaying, and I had started leading in the gym a little bit, but I had never led outdoors. And he was kind of the first person to push me a little and say, would you like to try it? And I was being unsure and hesitant. And he said, okay, well, why don't you just do a mock lead for fun? And I said, okay, actually that makes me feel good because I'm still on top rope. I can do a mock lead and have fun. And I don't know what happened. I did the mock lead, and all of a sudden I came down and I said, I want to lead that for real. I love that. And I don't know what happened. I just got on it again the second time, and I just let it, and that was it. From that day on, I was truly hooked, and I truly started enjoying climbing outdoors and actually stopped enjoying climbing indoors for fun. I do go indoors to train because I've realized that it's easy to train indoors in a gym, but I actually don't feel inspired in gyms.
I feel
don't
the same
feel
way.
motivated.
You're preaching to the choir here.
Yeah, exactly. So that
I have
was
fun when I go to new gyms that are really big.
right.
But yeah, in general, I'm not that motivated.
Yeah.
But, well, the reason you felt so solid leading is because you'd free soloed Secret Rock like hundreds of times, right?
Maybe. I would like to think so. Oh my God. Which was a kind of not even a highball boulder.
Well, it's funny
yeah.
because there's famous stories of Tommy Caldwell being coaxed up rocks by his dad with like candy and money rewards. So the Secret Rock thing with the candy on top, it all fits the same motivation.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah,
I didn't know
exactly.
that.
Oh. Again, we're talking a lot about how much you give back. But what are your personal climbing goals? You have pursued performance climbing, and even in that, I feel like you were like doing it to kind of establish yourself as a role model to then attract women to climbing. It's like all still part of this thing of like, well, I want to do this because then it'll help these other people. And we usually think of performance climbing as, such a self-centered thing. But I'm thinking of a story I read about you pursuing to do, this, I think it was like a 12C, this hardest climb at this one area. It got you noticed in the media, hilariously, actually, if you read the articles, but they didn't really get climbing very well. But that's
it's
world
terrible.
over. But yeah, but anyhow, you're probably one of the top climbers in India. You're definitely one of the top women climbers in India. I don't know how the genders compare, but what are your sort of climbing dreams as you pursue those personal goals?
So that 12C climb actually was something that, for me, yes, you're right. I did that in order to also sort of, inspire and motivate. And it was also my first project. So this whole experience or process of projecting was very new to me. And that was the first time I ever did it. And, in the process, I actually fell in love with finding projects and just working on one climb. So for me, I think moving forward, something that I do want to continue to do is, so ever since French Indian Masala, which is the 12C climb, I told myself, because I loved walking to the crag every morning to the base of the climb. In India, even walking to the base of the climb is a crazy experience because in Badami, it's a very small town. So I would have to walk through a tiny village, past people's houses, with monkeys sitting there waiting to grab bananas from my hand. And, people basically out in the fields trying to take care of their morning rituals. And I would actually go disturb them, and they would all get up with their little mugs of water and go hide. I would feel so bad. But that itself was a crazy experience. And I would go and work on this one route. And I realized that I love that process because to me, it was so calming and it would make me focus to a point where I would never focus on anything else like that, and what I also really came to love is how closely I got to know that one rock and that one route. I literally could remember every pebble or crystal or where it was or which hole was where. And like just getting to know this rock, was so beautiful to me. And of course, also understanding my own weaknesses, my own body movements, what I'm strong at, my fears, right, of falling. I really struggle with. It's still something that I'm constantly working towards. So I think personally for me, it's working towards, just training myself to not be so afraid of falling. But also every 2 years now, I want to find a project for myself and just go and be me and the rock and just work on something and try and do it. So end of last year, I actually climbed my hardest climb, which is the 8A. It's called Samsara in Badami. So as of now, it's only me and 3 other women who have done it. And I was the third one. And then a young 15-year-old girl was there on the same trip, and she watched me do it, and she got really psyched, and she tried it a few times, and then she sent it. A 15-year-old, she is so strong. But also something that I really want to explore apart from training and projecting is, and I've been wanting to really sort of train myself and do this for the past year. I want to get better at, I've been doing multi-pitch climbing, but I want to somehow train myself for like a big wall, because I would like to do at least one big wall in my life and experience that. For me, the thing with everything is learning and experiencing new things. So I never say no to experiencing something new. So I think within climbing, I definitely will continue to find projects. But I would also like to, get better at trad, because that's something that I recently started really falling in love with. And Chris Voltaggio and Alexis were really, generous and took me a bunch of times with them, and they've sort of encouraged me to keep working on it. So in India too, I'm working on trad and just start to, maybe eventually try and project like on trad, and that would be really exciting too for me. So yeah, I think my goal is to not just get stronger, but to also start really sort of fine-tuning my skills with technical skills and try and, just push myself a little bit more in terms of trad, and hopefully eventually big wall climb. And then, yeah, I think eventually that this is like much later in my life. I would like to also just get better with bolting and help with, exploring and establishing new lines, because I do love that whole exploratory aspect of things, of climbing as well. I love going on adventures and exploring and just, having to deal with sudden things that you don't expect, and like how do you problem solve for that. I kind of enjoy those sort of adventures. So I definitely in the future would like to learn route setting, like route establishment. I don't know what you would call that, but bolting and various other things.
Let me ask you a little bit about, you talk about these expectations, particularly of women, but of societal roles. And my impression has always been, and this is maybe like, some sort of xenophobic thing, but it feels like they are a little bit more staunch and set in stone in Indian society, even in the States anymore. Maybe again, like if we throw back a few years in the States, thinking about conservative 50s and 60s. But, you talk about these women who have these barriers, the scratches, the tanning, the roles they're supposed to play. How was your life in terms of that? I mean, it sounds like your parents were interested in having you in this school, but did you also feel any of that pressure and have to work through that, or were you able to kind of just shrug any of that off because of the way you were brought up?
Well, I've definitely had extremely supportive parents and super open-minded and liberal growing up. I mean, even for their generation, they're very open-minded. So they, of course, because of that, they, found an alternative school for me, and they've always sort of encouraged me in whatever I've wanted to do. I think recently I have definitely felt these sort of like slight like pressures, but of course they're still there like supporting. But there are definitely times where, I can see they're worried for me, and they tell me, are you going to like make a career? And are you sure you're going to be fine just doing things like this, like teaching rock climbing and nature connection? You're sure you don't want to figure out like a job and do something official? And so I can see a little bit of that sort of traditional thinking coming in, and it does make them a bit nervous at times, but they are, I have to give them credit. They're super, super understanding and good at being very open and flexible and not putting too much pressure on me. So growing up, I think even when I started climbing, I personally didn't get too many, challenges thrown at me, or I wasn't asked to stop doing what I'm doing. But in fact, I think more than my family, I've definitely felt just like sort of feeling like we don't belong in the outdoors in India from other people, like the general public. That has definitely happened to me personally when I've gone on my own climbing sessions and the outdoors, but also during claw, there were incidents that have happened. So I think in general, as a woman in India, you will have to face some of these challenges. It's something that you can't really escape. And I think a lot of it has to do with just the fact that I think maybe in the US, women's rights movement, there's been a lot happening for a while now. So there's been that time for people to change their mentality and change the way things work. Whereas in India, I think because things have been slower, right, to catch on, even including these various women's rights movements, it's taken a long time because it is definitely a more traditional conservative culture, especially back in the day. So I think it's just taken more time for all these things to catch on. So I think these changes have to and will happen. It's definitely happening, but I think it needs to just come from creating more awareness, education, exposure that people get, that women don't have to be treated like this, For example, like one time I went climbing with two of my guy friends in this mini forest that's kind of within the city. And of course, every time in India when we go climbing, there are access issues. We have forest department officers who either come and harass us or the police. And immediately it's like, what are you doing here? Why don't you have permission? You need to go get permits. And freaking India, if you try and get permits, you won't get anything for 2 years, probably 3 for all I know, So it's like, there's no point. There's no point in even arguing with these people or trying to even get permits. But this one time, it was a lady cop and a guy and another cop. And they came and found 3 of us climbing, and instantly they were like, what are you doing here? We said, we're just climbing. We're not doing anything. They said, why don't you have permits? We said, because it's just a outdoor, recreational activity. It's not like we're doing something illegal. And this is a public space. So we said, we have the rights to come here. Why are you giving us a difficult time? And to me, I was so stunned because the lady cop finally speaks up and says, yeah, I mean, it's okay if the 2 of you are here, but why is she here? And immediately it was, don't you know that you should be staying home? What are you doing in the outdoors? Do you know there are lots of crimes that take place in these forest areas where people come drunk and they do things to other people? There are so many rape cases in India. This is not a joke. And she just basically started scolding me for being outside and climbing. And I didn't know how to react. I was like, what? Like, what am I doing wrong? Like, am I not allowed to come enjoy a beautiful outdoor space and enjoy nature and rocks? What have I done wrong? And this has happened a few times. This is not a one-off incident, so it is something that we have definitely faced. And one time during Claw, there's a reservoir in Hampi, and so all of us on the 3rd day or something, we were like, okay, let's all take a break and go and chill and take a swim. And so we all walked there to this reservoir, and there was no one at the reservoir initially when we walked up to it. But as we got there, and within, I think, about 15 minutes of us getting there, I don't know where they came from. There were about 15-20 men that showed up, and they just stood all around, just staring at us, not moving, not saying anything, just staring at us. And we all immediately felt so uncomfortable, like we were not allowed to be there. We can't just enjoy a space without feeling unsafe, And thankfully we had that year, that was the first year, so we were not able to find a woman like photographer or videographer. So we had this guy photographer with us and his assistant, these 2 guys, and they were so sweet. They tried to go and talk to these men and tell them, you're making everyone really uncomfortable here. Can you all just leave? They would not budge. They just would not leave. So we all of us women swam for like some 10 minutes. We just packed up and we left because it was just too awkward, and it was too, scary as well for us to feel that and see that happening. And so this is like, I could go on. There's just so many instances like this in India. So definitely there are those sort of challenges. My family has never made things difficult for me, but yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah, I mean that sounds really difficult, and I was actually kind of curious, and I sort of didn't really want to bring it up as like a negative thing because I was curious about that because I mean even here in the States we've got this like idiotic pushback against these these women only courses, but it's it comes up here, and I was wondering if you got pushback, and I was also kind of thinking about how much courage it actually probably takes you, if I can compliment you, to even sort of broach this kind of thing and create these groups because of this pressure around you to go stay in your place, and that sounds like really predatory what was going on there. Yeah, I mean I can't imagine the sort of pressure around that, and maybe even feeling physically threatened at times with some of this stuff, and it makes me sad, obviously, but it also like it makes me impressed that your group would continue through that and just keep going, because that's the part of the intimidation of it, is to try to stop it from happening,
right? Yeah.
So
yeah, in terms of pushback, I mean initially the first year I think there were a few like male climbers in the community as well who were like, wait, but why is this, do you really need this, like what? And of course they were not, they were joking here and there and trying to kind of ask me, but no one ever sort of put a lot of pressure or said anything rude or mean. And I think right after the first edition, after that, no one has questioned it, and everyone in the climbing community, everyone has been supportive. So these incidents that have happened are definitely like the local people around. But yeah, in terms of pushback from the climbing community, initially I think people were a bit surprised, and I did have people asking me, but I think over time now, I think seeing that, ever since the first claw edition, there have been more women climbing, and this has been influencing and encouraging more women to just come try the sport and even try climbing outdoors. So now they're all just sort of like, oh yeah, this is good. We need more women climbers, which I know they genuinely felt. They've always felt that they want more women climbers, but you know how like you said, like I don't know what happens. There is this weird, I don't know if they get personally like a bit hurt or something, but when you first start this, they're all like, wait, why?
We're very, very fragile. We are, us men. It's like, it's ridiculous how fragile we are. I mean, the last 2 years in the States, or maybe even 4 years in the States, have just shown how actually fragile we just whine and complain like endlessly about everything. It's terrible. And climbing is no different. I don't think we're like all these tough, like, oh, we're so tough, we climb and we can overcome fear, but then we get to the ground and we just whine about everything. It's absurd. But so hopefully you're like going to change that. But what you said about them suddenly realizing like women climbers are good, I mean, that I talk about that endlessly. Like, God, when I started climbing, there was really so few women in the sport, and it's great. It's like, wow, look around us. I mean, we were just all these guys, like these just sullen dudes, like hanging out together. And it's like so much better to have women around. Like, who has a problem with this? Like, what guy has a problem with this? It's like so much better now.
Yeah, no. And it's so interesting, because with some of them, I did have like long conversations with a few people explaining why we have had to create this space for ourselves. And some have just naturally realized on their own. And interestingly, the second claw edition also, we had a guy photographer who sat in. So each claw event, we keep space for discussion time where we actually sit and discuss all these different, just sort of what the climbing community is like, these sort of details on what it feels like to be a woman and have to do such things and climb and deal with like general Indian public as well. Like we discuss a lot of different challenges that we face, so that we're also leaving these women with all this knowledge and this awareness, right? And it was so, so cute. But after our discussion during the second claw event, the photographer came to me and he said, my God, I never realized such like, details about such challenges that you all face. And I'm so sorry. I'm going to apologize on behalf of all men of this world. then you guys have to, I was like, it's okay, relax. But he was like, no, I completely understand why you need this now. I was like, yeah. But, it shows that when people actually hear firsthand our experiences and understand how it makes us feel, I think that's when a lot of people end up realizing, oh yeah, no, this actually makes sense. This is needed. But yeah, interestingly, recently, I've climbed with a lot of people here who love having us women around. And I've even had a few guys who are like, I need to watch you climb because your beta is usually amazing and it ends up working for me. So can you come and try this problem, which I'm not able to crack? And I've just been so grateful to these men, because I'm like, that's so sweet, because on my own, it's so funny. We women create these stories as well in our minds that we're not as strong, we're not as good at this, and because naturally myself, I probably wouldn't just go up and start telling someone saying, hey, why don't you try this, or this beta might work for you. Like, usually a lot of us women are more quiet in that sense, whereas guys are more confident in going and saying, hey, like, I think this will work for you or this won't, and like sort of. So I would usually be quiet, but then a few of the guys I've been climbing with, they're like, you're so strong. Like, we want to watch you climb as well and take away, like just ideas or suggest, beta, whatever it is. And they would make me speak up and they would make me give them suggestions, which to me felt so awkward at first. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work for you because, you guys are probably stronger or you have more like, reach, and which I don't because I'm short. I have all these ideas and it stunned me because it actually often we would give each other, suggestions and we would discuss and exchange and it actually would work for all of us. Like, some of mine beta would work for them and some of theirs would work for me. So it was just beautiful to experience that and see that change already taking place here. And I think that also gave me some hope. I was like, okay, this is a good sign. We're all heading in the right direction here.
Yeah. You keep deflecting away from talking about yourself. But I'm gonna get a few more questions. It's fine. Yeah. No, it's actually very endearing that we keep. But I do want a few more questions about your climbing. Okay. Because I'm just curious. Again, some of your motivations, and not to sound like your parents, but what did you study in college?
I studied environmental studies and biology.
Okay, and how many applications do you have out for jobs? No, I'm just kidding.
None.
Anyhow, so in what is your, aside from teaching women, what is your sort of livelihood then right now as using that degree or anything else? Again, not to sound like your mom or your dad.
No, it's fine. It's teaching nature connection to people and, nature education. So this is something that I've always truly been passionate about. I love animals and I love plants and really obsessed with snakes. So I like to also sort of teach people not to fear snakes as well. And in general, try and connect people to plants and animals and landscapes. And it's so nice because for me, this passion of wanting to reconnect people with the natural world goes so well and hand in hand with climbing, because to me, I started realizing over like the last couple of years that climbing is in fact a form of nature connection. If you think about it, right? Because you're going to these beautiful places and you're climbing something that's natural, moving your body and using your mind and touching. The sense of touch is just so heightened. And so to me, I was like, why? Like, I need to start teaching climbing as well with this focus of nature connection or merging those two together. So in the US, after I was, guiding in Peru for over 10 years, I was guiding people into the rainforest. Then climbing came into my life and I realized if I keep going into the rainforest, I can't climb as much. So there was this conflict. But in the meantime, I found an organization I started working with called Wild Earth in upstate New York. And I just loved working with children through them. They would work with public schools and also just private summer camps and programs. And I loved working with kids and teaching them about nature and about animals. So that sort of got me into this whole teaching all about nature. And that's actually when I met Alexis. That was also a funny story because I had reached out to her and emailed her that I'm doing Climb Like a Woman. And then turns out couple of years later, she came and started working for the same organization. So we've worked together as well. And then when I decided that, I want to move back to India, I thought, okay, what is it that I want to do in life? And I realized this is what I want to do in life. It's show people that nature is just brilliant, and we can learn actual life lessons by observing birds, by observing animals and plants, and along with that, bringing my passion for climbing just made me even more happier. So in India, I've started my own organization now, which teaches nature connection to people. And part of that is also climb and in nature, where I take people climbing and teach them climbing, beginners. But the whole idea is as we walk to the rocks, I do various sensory activities. I teach them about the plants and animals that we pass by as we walk to the rocks. And then when we're climbing as well, I tell them to sort of be aware and more observant about what's moving around them, who are the creatures that live in those rocks that we're climbing, right? So just bringing in a lot more of like nature awareness as a part of climbing, because my hope is that, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure you've noticed this too, that there are a lot of climbers, even though we like to consider ourselves very outdoorsy and like very aware of, nature and conservation, there are a lot of us who just go to a place and we walk straight to the rock and we observe nothing and pay attention to nothing and we climb what we want to climb and we leave without really, learning about who are the other living beings that are sharing that space with us, right? Who is it also home to? Because we are going into some other animals or living beings' home and we're happily just like putting chalk and climbing and doing whatever we want and then we leave. And it's just, to me, it's like so rude because you wouldn't go to your friend's house and just go mess things up and leave. It's rude, right? So I've noticed that even within the climbing community, there's definitely those climbers who are more sensitive and more aware and they actually observe and become curious and learn. But there are a lot of people who just go and climb, or even other like, activities like trekking or hiking. I've noticed that there's this thing that's lacking, which is curiosity and being curious and wanting to learn about an insect or about, the life cycle of a plant or a flower. There is this lack of, wanting to really, truly understand what's around us, right? And so my whole thing in life is I want to make that somehow trendy and like tell people that when you start learning about these things, you learn magical things about nature. Nature has crazy cool stories like mysteries and surprises that, you would never imagine that these animals are this hardcore and they're so badass and they're, the life cycles are crazy and hardcore and there's just so much to learn from nature, right? So my whole thing is if I can bring people now into climbing, but also introduce them into the sport with more of like nature awareness in general, I hope that they carry that forward as they go on into climbing more or into any outdoor activity. And in general, my thing is I want to connect people back to nature in a more fun, like deeper way where this curiosity gets triggered, because that's what's really crucial. Like, children are so curious, right? I don't know what happens as we grow up as adults. It dies. I don't know why, but like we just become less curious. And I'm like, why? Why aren't we asking questions about that praying mantis or that grasshopper? Or, how does the grasshopper make that sound? How does a cricket make its sound? How do they lay eggs or whatever it is? We don't ask questions, but kids do. And so even when I was working with children, so here too, like the US, I've continued to try and work with children as well, because that sort of keeps, being around their energy and their questions of why and curiosity keeps my curiosity alive as well. And then I keep questioning, and then I like to go and teach this to adults. So it's sort of this whole process of trying to, bring back nature as something amazing that we have to value and continue to be curious about and learn about, because it's endless. Even now, I feel like I barely know a tiny bit about these, cool beings around me, like very tiny. Even though everyone in the US was so, like, people would tell me, oh, you know so much about insects and snakes. And in my head, I'm going, I don't know enough. I wish I know like 3 times more what I know right now. So yeah, it's like a never-ending process, whether it's climbing or nature. For me, it's just, we just keep learning. There's so much to learn, so you just keep learning.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Gowri for doing that, connecting all the way from Bangalore. And if you're interested in what she is up to, furthering your understanding of her world, you can follow her on Instagram at Gowri Varanashi. You can also follow Climb Like a Woman at Climb Like a Woman, and also climblikeawoman.com on the interwebs will get you to their website. And if you can find a way to support them, that would be amazing. And if you have connections in the industry, that would be amazing too. I have those connections. I'm going to bring it up. All right, folks, I don't know what's happening where you live, but Western Colorado has this amazing weather streak going on if you want to rock climb. If you want to ski or, live, we could do with some snow. But still, I'm out there guiltily enjoying splitter days, warm afternoons, rock climbing, despite the carnage that it's producing on the watershed. What do you do with that guilt? I don't really know. I feel a little helpless. But at least climbing takes my mind off that helplessness. I hope it's doing that for you too. Whether you're getting snow where you are, whether you're ice climbing, whether you're skiing, go out and enjoy the outdoors. It's okay. It's okay. And of course, check those knots.
That notion that we should each be free to develop our own talents, whatever they may be, and not be held back by artificial barriers, man-made barriers, certainly not heaven-sent.